Next up, a fireside chat with a brilliant scientific storyteller and two brilliant scientific leaders. Please welcome to the stage Michael Specter, staff writer for The New Yorker and visiting scholar at MIT. We've got Renee Wegrzyn, director of ARPA-H, and John Terrett, head of research at CRISPR Therapeutics.
Hi, everyone. We're going to talk about big data, and we have 20 minutes for it, and I'm sure that we'll be able to solve that problem in less than 20. So, Renee, you probably know, she runs what I think is the most advanced experimental and far-sighting arm of the US government, and I actually mean that. That's a rare thing to say, but it's true. John's company is changing the world as we speak. They already have a revolutionary product out to edit your way out of sickle cell anemia, but you've probably heard of their other work, and he'll talk about it. And what we're here really to talk about is like how we can obtain, share, and understand the data that exists so that it makes sense and it can be leveraged for these wonderful developments. 25 years ago, I wrote a story for The New Yorker about this small company in Mountain View that was trying to figure out how to do a search engine. And I was talking to Larry Page, and I said, what is your goal here? He said, it's simple. I just want everyone on Earth to have access to all the information and all the data that exists right in front of you, easily and cheaply. And I looked at him like he was insane, which I thought he was, and then he said, of course, the problem's going to be once we are able to do that, you're going to have to figure out a way to share it, aggregate it, use it. And I think that's where we are today. We have endless amounts of data sets. Some are owned by private industry, some are owned by government, some we don't even know, some are from different countries, and it's very important that we figure out a way to share that data if you want to solve some of the big, terrible health problems that we actually are, for the first time, capable of solving. So I'm going to ask the first mean question to Renee. How do we do this? How do we start making it possible to access the data that you would need to get your job done?
Well, I think at ARPA-H, we think a lot about first principles. And so one of the realities is with the federal government, there's a lot of requirements to share data, but what a lot of people don't know is we don't collect a lot of that data because it's very inefficient to do that in an automated way, in an intuitive way, and to do that at scale. And so some of our first investments as an agency has been to make those tools through our biomedical data fabric is a great example. It's like the least sexy thing that we do at ARPA-H, but it's one of those first things that we need to do. We think once we can bring together and aggregate that data that we know is of high quality and is curated and is tagged in a way that can be used for AI, that's going to be very critical to then bring our tools into the real world. We were talking before the panel today, for example, if we could incentivize pre-competitive data sharing across companies, we may be able to have enough data to train models where before you even start an experiment or start a clinical trial, you will know if it will be successful and be approved by the FDA. If you had that power with the tool, everybody would use it, but the problem is that we don't have enough data out there to be sharing. And so this is something that we're really trying to work on, incentivizing that data sharing, whether it's looking at genomic sequencing after using a CRISPR tool, or doing a drug trial on a small molecule where most of the data is actually negative data that you never share. So that's one of the things that we're really trying to drive.
Maybe I can add to that. It's all very well having data, but you have to be able to use it. And like you were saying, formatting for Google back in the day would have been a huge thing. There's loads of data out there right now, and people don't know how to use it. And I like to say there was an experiment on humans done in Cambridge, not far from here. 3 companies started with the same technology, CRISPR Therapeutics, Editas, and Intellia. And if you follow them, they ended up in 3 completely different places using the same data that was available to them about what drugs can we make that might actually work. and we all did different things, and we all ended up in very different places. And then going back to, should we share? Absolutely. We were discussing earlier, companies, institutions in general don't like to share everything for competitive reasons. If I think about how many drugs I've tried to make over the past 20 years, 90% fail. Why was I protecting data around those failures? So fail information is as important as positive information.
Well, actually, since you mentioned failure, which is one of my favorite topics, there's endless amounts of, people do studies all the time. And when they're good, they get published, and then everyone sees the data. But tons of studies don't get published. They're not good enough. The results aren't what we'd hoped. And you have just an incomprehensible amount of really good data out there that basically gets tossed. Is there some way that you think that that could be used, marshaled, or is that just hopeless?
No, absolutely. If failures aren't published, and it's a fairly obvious experiment, lots of other people are going to do the same experiment and fail. So it's absolutely vital that those things are published. And now we get into human nature and scientific journals and all sorts of weird stuff like that. And I know there's open use journals now, but we absolutely need more of that information out there.
When Jonas Salk developed the vaccine for polio, he was interviewed famously by Edward R. Murrow, who said, "Are you going to patent this?" And Salk said, "Would you patent the sun?" Now, today, you bet they'd patent the sun. But the point is, there are some things that I think we probably would agree ought to be available to us, and maybe they're not. How do we deal with that in the public arena?
Yeah, this is a little bit of a philosophical point. I think that right now, data is so valuable that there's a tendency to want to own the data. And I think we're at this issue. We have companies come to ARPA-H all the time. They don't have enough data to move forward in their product or whatever it might be. So I think we need a frame shift, patent your proprietary process, your hardware, your tools, but more data sharing, so that I think that at the end of the day, it feels really uncomfortable, but that's actually going to be what's needed to accelerate and advance the state of the art.
What is the mechanism by which that can happen? Do we need yet another regulatory body? Is the FDA capable of?
We should have 10 more regulatory bodies. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
So
Great.
I think what we need is incentives, right? And we need proofs of concept that what I just described actually makes sense. And so one of our big bets in this area is an effort called Matrix, which is about a $50 million project that we take all 3,000 FDA-approved drugs and we look at 9,000 diseases where there's been market failures. Most of these are rare diseases, and mine, and see, can we find instances where there's a druggable target that maybe is also useful for a rare disease. We have a proof of concept of one where the founder of this company actually cured his own rare disease, Castleman's disease, by mining the literature, bringing together people to say, let me just try to take this drug as a last resort. And it worked, and he cured himself. And so he's on a mission to do this for all rare diseases. But what he needs now is access to that proprietary data. And so that's one way that we want to get to proof of concept. And we want to do that we've set the market for 25 diseases. Because what that does is that number is big enough that we can go to the FDA, we can go to policymakers and say, you have to have a path for this, not as a 1Z for a disease, but you have to start thinking about a process that we can reuse over and over to simplify that path forward. So we don't make regulation, but we can create data that creates the pressure that policymakers and regulators can't say no to.
So it seems to me that the sort of ideal model of data available to the public is the protein data bank, where all published proteins are deposited in a place. It allowed DeepMind to basically develop AlphaFold, which also, by the way, is publicly available. Is there something else we should, is there another data set like the PDB that we really need to pay attention to?
I'll take us on a step forward in that answer. So, having been through a number of novel modalities with the FDA and other regulators, they build knowledge as you're doing it. And by the time you analyze data, enough data, the regulators have caught up, and they're now okay with these modalities being used in humans, or not, if it turns out not to be safe. So Renee and I were talking about it beforehand. What's around the corner? And how do we start generating those data now? And I start thinking about gene correction. At the moment, we do CRISPR knockouts. Right? That's creating enough difficulties with different regulators. In vivo, because we're editing a human. Right? The approved drug Casgevy is ex vivo and then goes in. They're OK with that. In vivo is tougher. But in less than 5 years, we're going to be inserting whole genes and correcting genetic disease. And we don't want to learn just with the regulators. We want to learn ahead of time. And that's really where we can start getting conglomerate data together about the safety of doing it.
Yeah. Well, I just want to kind of add on to that. By looking around the corner, at ARPA-H right now, we have several imaging programs that are launching. And what we're realizing as we launch these programs is FDA doesn't have a high quality, highly curated data set that they could use for not only our performers and awardees, but anybody in the industry to use to get their approvals. And so we have a solicitation out right now, a request for information for data sets that FDA can qualify and use for us to bring our products forward. So I really challenge the audience here. What is that for this room? What is it for gene editing? What is it for synthetic biology that we can start to put together as a data set that we can all use to sort of accelerate to those approvals? I didn't realize until I was in this role what a huge gap that was in the regulatory domain.
How do I've spent my whole life writing about these things in which we discover an exciting thing and then the sciences moves fast and humans not quite as fast. And that's understandable. I think it's human nature. But now, I hate to use the term that everyone's using, but in the world of AI, things have the potential to really accelerate.
Yep.
And in a good way and possibly in a bad way. I can imagine that AI would be a godsend to aggregating data, but how do you do that in such a way that it's universally accessible? We're also dealing with other countries. Do we want to be competitive with other countries? Do we want to share with them? How does that work?
We heard a little bit today about something like biosurveillance, right? I think that's a great case study for the public good where we have to figure out a way to share data country to country so that we're not in the same situation as we were at the start of the last pandemic where we kind of were on lockdown. Even countries that were our friends weren't sure how to share data with us. And I think it's a great use case. If we can figure that out, we can figure out other diseases. But we absolutely need that because you talk about competitiveness. We don't have enough data to build our models. Italy doesn't, Japan doesn't. And so we need to really start working together, figure out bilateral agreements so we can come together and share that data and power those models. But that doesn't exist today. I think there's pieces, CDC and others are starting to bridge that gap, but we need to do that in a much bigger way.
Maybe you could create a system where the data is shared, and then those that want to pay for it can use it. And then those that don't want to pay for it because they think they're going to go their way, don't. Because this all comes down to human nature at the end of the day, how much we can share. I think we can try and build the systems. If we could get the regulatory authorities around the world to share, they share at those moments, those good things or those bad things, but generally sharing, you'll see companies go on clinical hold, and you don't know why. And it would be really useful to know why so that you don't do that same thing.
Okay, so this is my idea. Every time I bring it up, people say I'm insane, but I'm good with that, by the way. But eminent domain is a thing where you're allowed to seize land if you're the government, if you need to, and maybe we should have that for data. Like, shouldn't there be some higher calling where the government can say, I don't care, Novo Nordisk, sorry guys, you're great. I need that data and we're going to have it. Is that not possible? Is that not logical?
I think it happens.
Really? Is it? Does it? The government just takes data?
Just takes data. I would never
I'm
do
blaming
that.
you. You're the government in this scenario. I don't know. I guess I feel like the incentives really are to hoard. And when we look at other countries, China's doing some really cool stuff. And they're beating our ass in some areas of this research. And it would be nice to share with them, but the words that come out of politicians' mouths are not encouraging when it comes to the idea of sharing data with what they consider to be an adversary. And we're talking about sickle cell, we're talking about cancer, we're talking about all sorts of diseases. This shouldn't be an adversarial process.
I think a way forward, the human race probably isn't ready for it now, is to mandate the...
Is what?
To mandate the data be shared. And any drug that's going forward, you'll know that some conferences you go to, they say, well, you have to show us the structure of the compound. It can't just be compound A. But I think that's just something we're not ready for yet.
Yeah, also, it really doesn't fit into a presidential campaign bumper sticker.
There's a book called Bad Pharma. Has anyone ever read the book called Bad Pharma? And it's supposed to expose, it's a book listing exposures of drug companies that did things wrong, that ended up in court. And even in court, there's a letter from, I think, Pfizer. And it's all blacked out apart from the words and the. So I don't know we can get there yet.
Well, I think you've almost flipped the script a little bit, Michael, from nation states to individuals. I do think that there are areas like rare disease where patients and their families are such incredible advocates. They understand the value of their data, of their sequences. I think that's another really interesting place to start, because in some cases there's 25 people across the globe that have a given disease, and if we're not coming together.
And it costs so much to develop a drug.
That's right.
And your argument is that the data can really bring that down and make it specific.
Well, it's, first of all, just the speed to diagnosis is 5 to 7 years now. How can we bring that to 5 to 7 weeks if we start sharing data, right? Like it can be a complete paradigm shift, but we need to figure out how to empower those patients to share data, but then get those agreements with countries.
Well, one of the shared data issues that I don't know how you solve is, so we developed the mRNA vaccines in a year, and that was kind of miraculous. Actually, I think there's a company in Cambridge who had the vaccine in 3 days. But you needed time to test it, and there's a certain way that you have to carry these tests out. Would greater access to data and surrogate markers make it possible to move that kind of thing much more rapidly? Because I don't think even though a year is a super fast time, I don't think we want a year anymore.
I'll take the first stab, but I think so. And part of the data that we need to be sharing is not just around the right sequences for efficacy, but around manufacturability, solubility, all the things that we didn't have time to think about with the last vaccine, and have those really understood before the next pandemic. Our program, APEX, is designed to do that. It actually separates design of antigen for all the other vaccines that we don't have vaccines for, all the other viral families that we don't have vaccines for, and separate that from manufacture. Maybe it's better as an mRNA or a DNA or whatever that might be. And I think we need to collect that data now so that we have that library to look at and start from. So instead of 100 days, maybe it's 20 days next time.
Let me go back to optimism then, instead of like, oh, this is tricky. The data exists out there now for many, many things where we could make better decisions. AI can help that. But we've got to format the data in the right way. Manufacturability would be one of them. Potency of mRNA would be another. People aren't pulling all of that together and saying, if I want to do this, whether it's a vaccine or a genetic therapy or whatever it is, people are not putting all that together and just asking simple questions. It's data are out there.
So we actually only have a couple minutes left. I'll ask each of you this. It's an unfair question, which is my specialty. 10 years from now, is this going to be kind of worked out, or are we going to be up here again talking about what the hell, like the private companies have this data and China has that data, and how are we going to resolve this?
Well, I can't wait to 10 years from now, because even, backstage we were talking about, I think you said it was George Church that got a PhD for 3 years to sequence half a gene, right? Yeah. Where are we going to be 10 years from now? And I think I'm comfortable with not being able to predict that at this phase, but it's important that we create options. I'm always optimistic on this part.
10 years from now, there will be dinosaurs.
There'll be what?
There will be dinosaurs.
That is an inadmissible response. Yeah, good. I'd love to have dinosaurs, speaking of George. You think we're going to be able to share? I really do worry about the sort of divisive world that we live in America, but not just America. I mean, the idea of sharing data with China would be really nice. I don't know how that's going to happen.
Well, we can't forget about the defensive part, not only for kind of biodefense, but we're really thinking a lot about healthcare. If you watch the news, you've seen the inability to even file an insurance claim because of ransomware attacks. And so we've made investments in the DigiHeals program, and probably one of the more fun things, we have a competition at DEF CON this summer and next summer in collaboration with DARPA to look at infrastructure and what happens when somebody tries to take down a biotech facility or tries to take down a hospital. How can we create the tools to patch those vulnerabilities? We don't have them right now. So national security, I see people in the military in the audience, tip of the spear, cyber. If you came to HHS and understand where we were in healthcare, we are decades behind. And so how do we catch up? And that's going to mean something to everybody in this room when it comes to that data around sequencing, whether it's humans or microbes.
I'm being told that I'm done and I should get the hell off the stage. These guys are going to solve the future if anyone will. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Chris.